Myanmar possesses abundant fresh water, blessed by several major rivers and ample rainfall. In fact, all of Myanmar's agricultural, industrial, and household water needs combined require less than 3% of the country's annually available renewable water resources. Myanmar's hydrological riches also carry substantial development potential, especially for hydroelectricity. Experts estimate the country's rivers hold 100 gigawatts of unexploited hydropower. That's equivalent to almost 1/4 of all the electricity that the entire United States consumes in a year. Yet Myanmar's rapid expansion of hydroelectric capacity is deeply entwined with the nation's ongoing civil war, as many of the key river sites earmarked for development are located in regions claimed by ethnic separatist groups. These groups, who have long fought against the central government, see state control of water resources as both a symbol and a tool of their marginalization, aggravating grievances and fueling the cycle of violence. As the country grapples with recurrent domestic strife, the military's 2021 coup has further intensified these challenges, plunging Myanmar deeper into turmoil. I'm David Michel, Senior Fellow for Water Security with the Global Food and Water Security Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. You're listening to a 6-part podcast exploring the dynamics of water conflict and the possibilities of water cooperation. This is Hidden Depths. Strains on the world's water resources are mounting. While the planet's population quadrupled over the past century, world water use has risen faster, swelling almost 8-fold since 1900. Growing populations and economies will make even greater claims on global resources. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development projects that industry will require 5 times more water in 2050 than it did in 2000. Global agriculture will need 30% more water by mid-century, while water demand for energy production will climb 140%. Continuing climate change threatens to exacerbate the strains on world's water supplies by shifting precipitation patterns and worsening extreme weather events. Where different countries or communities rely on the same waters, many observers fear that impending collisions between competing demands could foster sharpened competition or open conflict for control of crucial resources. Myanmar's pursuit of hydropower in recent years highlights how critical tensions around water systems can escalate into violent conflicts.
It is vital to look at hydropower in the context of violent conflict in Myanmar, because most of the hydropower sites with the greatest potentials are located in areas that are affected by insurgencies, the long-running ones, but also the new conflict due to the military coup in 2021.
Kyungmee Kim is a researcher in the Department of Peace and Conflict Research at Uppsala University in Sweden. Her work on Myanmar shows that water-related conflicts are often driven less by clashes over physical water supplies and more by struggles over political power.
There is a really inherent connection between this society and water governance and resource management. But also at the same time, the role of power and politics is crucial to understand this relationship.
Violent internal struggles have riven Myanmar since independence in 1948, when the political exclusion of certain groups sparked several ethno-nationalist rebellions. Hydropower development is embedded in this history. For the central government, siting and constructing hydroelectric plants in areas claimed or controlled by insurgents represented a strategy for extending and exercising state power over resources and territory.
The large-scale hydropower is always almost state-sponsored or state-backed. The states are the ones who are providing the sites, permissions, and also attracting the investors and so on. And most of this foreign investment comes from neighboring countries like China and Thailand. So there's really a strong political economy drivers that's linked to the region that plays a big role in hydropower development in the country.
Building hydropower plants requires vast areas of land for dam construction, road access, equipment, and reservoirs to store water and regulate river flows. But in Myanmar, the government has often resorted to land seizures, forced population displacements, arbitrary arrests, and militarizing large regions within territories claimed by ethnic forces to secure the areas needed for state projects. These actions have sparked protests at numerous dam sites.
So some conflicts we can look at is this Kachin Independence Organization in the north and the Mitsun Dam that was mostly financed and constructed by the State Power Corporations, or SPIC, so for the state-owned enterprises in China.
The Mitsun Dam was to be built on the Irrawaddy River in Kachin State, Myanmar. If completed, the dam would create a reservoir that would entirely submerge 47 villages underwater and displace 18,000 people. Designed to generate hydropower for export to neighboring China, the dam exemplified the exclusion of Kachin communities from managing their own resources.
All these business activities were not benefiting the local population the most. They were benefiting mostly the foreign businessmen, cronies, and some armed actors. So this type of grievances are very much linked to the grievances linked to the civil war. But the Mitsun Dam also represented a great environmental and social injustice to the Kachin population. So this type of grievances are very much linked to the grievances linked to the civil war. It's also related to how ethnic minorities were treated, how the land was managed, how people were evicted, or how military was stationed in certain part of the country.
In March 2011, the Kachin Independence Organization issued an open letter to the Chinese government, warning that the Mitsun Dam project could ignite civil war if the Myanmar military invaded Kachin territory to guard construction sites. Soon after, government troops clashed with the Kachin Independence Army at a smaller dam installation. State-run media claimed the military offensive was needed to protect hydropower resources from the Kachin insurgents. The combat killed dozens, ending a long-standing ceasefire.
So the resistance to these water projects are not only caused by the matters related to water. So it really overlaps with many different dimensions of armed conflict, ethnic tensions, inequality, how natural resources governed in the country, not just because of the water project. So I think we really need to understand this broader context.
For the inhabitants of the country's many ethnic areas, government megadam projects dispossess local populations of their water resource rights and expropriate water uses for the central state. Water conflict in Myanmar revolves around the intersections between hydropower and political power. Who has the legitimate authority to manage water resources? In what spaces? For what purposes? To whose cost and benefit? Many of the most potentially combustible water-related conflicts, however, arise between different communities and water users at the local level. While Myanmar has a surplus of water resources, other areas of the world suffer from shifting or shrinking water supplies, catalyzing conflicts between competing users. The Sahel region in Africa has witnessed a number of violent clashes in recent years between rural farmers and nomadic or semi-nomadic herders around water resources availability, access, and rights. Julie Snorek, a geographer at Dartmouth College, studied the Fulani, Tuareg, Hausa, and other communities in the West African nation of Niger.
The conflict itself between farmers and herders is typically between Fulani, Tuareg, pastoralists who are mobile, and the Hausa, sedentarized kind of farming communities. In the north, where you have the smallest amount of rainfall, about 150 millimeters per annum, so versus the far south of Niger, where you have about 350 to 400
The differential rainfall patterns drive a cycle of seasonal migration as the herders move their livestock to watering sources and grazing lands further south.
In the north, if you are a pastoralist and you've taken your herds around, a lush pasture all year and it's starting to dry out, then you essentially want to move south as quickly as you can across this north-south axis, which is what is traveled by the pastoralist. You have to pass through lots of farmland from this valley in the north, the Azoak, into the southern areas when the rain stops falling.
Historically, systems of customary arrangements and traditional practices have governed herders' access to watering points in cultivated areas and farming communities.
The local chiefs and then the elected officials come together and kind of come up with a consensus process to determine when the pastoralist can descend from this open access pastoral zone. And that decision is very important. It's based on rainfall and it's based on when the harvest happens. And that time period when the rain stops is a very critical time when those fights are breaking out, especially when the harvest hasn't been taken off the fields and the animals are descending towards those fields. And essentially, there's no fences to stop them from consuming the produce of these vulnerable populations.
In some areas, however, these management mechanisms have become increasingly contentious as the shifting rainfall patterns have pushed herders' migrations ever further south, and the growing needs for agriculture to meet rising food demand continuously increases farmers' water requirements.
And so the institutions themselves and the people making those decisions are from all of these stakeholder groups. However, because the farmers often have stronger political power, because they're a bigger voting base, and thus politicians want to curry favor with the farmers. As a result, they often will give them the access to support, sometimes armed support, and meaning the gendarmes will basically stand guard in people's fields, and they'll also extract money from the pastoralists to just pass through, et cetera, and then also from the farmers. So there's also that tension of when they see that it's going to cause violence, then they bring in maybe another element that foments that violence.
Rising competition over water resources is also spurring conflicts between different herder groups.
In the northern region, between Fulani and Tuareg, because the pasture that's located there is very precious, it's a diminishing resource, especially with the increasing pressures from an increasing number of animals. And the reason that there's more animals penetrating into that open access area, the Azoak, is because of the ECOWAS ruling in 2010 that basically allowed for cattle from Benin, from Togo, from Nigeria to pass over the border and use those pastures through an international economic agreement. So as a result, the natural resources in the north are highly contested, and there's a lot of continuing challenge over water points. Those who have political power very often are those who get the permits in order to build these wells, but also being able to essentially kind of enclose the territory around it because they can choose who gets access to the water and who doesn't.
In many parts of the world, mounting pressures from global climate change are exacerbating potential water-related conflict risks.
Climate variability, the increased likelihood of droughts, floods, etc., is affecting food security, water scarcity, resource competition. It's disrupting livelihoods. It's basically pushing migration.
Nazanine Moshiri, a senior analyst working on climate, environment, and conflict at the International Crisis Group, speaks to the connection between water-related violence and climate change.
What our research has really shown is that the relationship between climate change and deadly conflict, and water, of course, comes into that, water resources, is really complex and context-specific.
Moshiri's work at Crisis Group has identified 3 particular pathways linking water to conflict risks.
So the first pathway we've been looking at are when, climate distress, creates insecurity in livelihood, when millions of livestock are decimated by the drought, as they were in the Horn of Africa over the last few years since 2020. The second pathway is when you have displacement, people moving because of droughts, floods, extreme weather, etc. And then the third pathway, we look at transboundary water disputes. There is constantly, a lot of tension, and there is a potential that it could escalate.
The key element common to all three pathways, Moshiri explains, is the governance capacities of countries and communities to manage water resources and water risks.
It's rare that water itself is a source of tension. It's the use of water, it's the governance of water that can really create a risk of conflict, whether that's scarcity because of droughts or excess because of floods. It really it's only likely to lead to conflict when there is kind of weak governance or an already existing fragility in that context.
Worsening environmental shocks and pressures, however, can weaken or overwhelm the governance capacities of vulnerable populations.
And we've seen this time and time again, where disasters and climate change basically erode resilience of communities, That increases their vulnerability.
Moshiri, who is based in Nairobi, points to Kenya as an example.
There are many parts of Kenya where we're seeing this dynamic happening. So as you probably know, there was a record-breaking drought in the Horn of Africa, which started in 2020. There was so much pressure because of the drought and because of just environmental degradation, shrinking pasture, and issues over mobility and moving across borders, that even these kind of pre-existing traditional agreements, customary practices were under a lot of strain. Herders basically are traveling longer distances in search of pasture and water. And so this pits them against other herders, owners of large farms, conservancies, etc. These traditional agreements and practices can hold. But unfortunately, when they come under strain, as they have done in recent years, then you can just see them fraying and then disintegrating completely.
Water politics, like all politics, is a question of who gets what, when, and how. And like all politics, conflict can arise around each and every element of the equation. From Myanmar and Southeast Asia to the Sahel and Horn of Africa, water conflict dynamics frequently revolve less around environmental changes and resource pressures, and more around governance policies, practices, and capacities. Inequitable allocation of the costs and benefits of water management and inadequate access to decision-making processes can loom larger in generating conflict than unequal allocation of or inadequate access to the physical water itself. Inequality, exclusion, and the sense of shared injustice may galvanize collective grievances that can stoke violent conflicts. In much of the world, overburdened institutions and fraying governance capacities increasingly struggle to meet these challenges. But these are not the only challenges to water security. Join us next time as we explore new and emerging conflict risks to water resources and water governance, from terrorist attack to cyber crimes. I'm David Michel at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. You've been listening to Hidden Depths. Hidden Depths is an initiative of the Project on Water Security, part of the CSIS Global Food and Water Security Program. Thank you to our guests, Kyungmee Kim, researcher in the Department of Peace and Conflict Research at Uppsala University, Julie Snorek, geographer at Dartmouth College, and Nazanine Moshiri, senior analyst at the International Crisis Group. Hidden Depths is produced by Sarah Baker, edited with Emma Dodd, and narrated by David Michel.